25-30, 35-40, 45-50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. Oh, the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. No, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of The Three Technique here at the intersection of the X's and O's and the Jimmies and Joes. My name's Garrett Turney, and Mitch and Trey out tonight, so no boys on the episode tonight, but we have a special guest, as you can see. We are joined by Ryan from Inside the Pylon. Excited to have you on tonight. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Well, Garrett, I appreciate you guys having me here tonight. This is exciting for me. It's been probably about 12 years since I was in college when I was asked to do a guest spot, and that was a little before the podcast boom kind of became a thing. So this was like back when radio was still kind of a thing. So excited to be here. We've been kind of doing Inside the Pylon. It's we label it as a Midwest college football podcast, but it more or less functions as a Big Ten podcast. A little bit of Notre Dame and some Maction mixed in when the time calls, but that's more so a once November midweek stuff rolls around and it's like, we're looking for some stuff midweek to do. That's when we'll kind of mix it in, or in the off season. But we've been doing this since April. Myself and my co-host Clinton, we used to be co-workers, and he'd been bugging me to do a football podcast for the longest time. And it's something I'd had, not the football podcast part, but doing podcasts in the past. So something I always kind of resisted, because I'm like, that sounds like a lot of work. And I know what's going to happen is I'm going to have to do all the technical stuff, and I don't want to do that. And then eventually, it was probably around the national championship game this past year, I finally kind of capitulated. Like, you know what? That sounds like a good idea. But if we're going to do this, what's our angle going to be? And because, it's one of those things like, there's so many people out there doing the national thing. Well, you guys included. So we didn't want to be kind of lost in that shuffle. So he's an Ohio State fan. I'm a Notre Dame fan. So, that part of the country is something that we were, I don't want to say like intimately familiar with, but that's the football that he grew up watching, and I'd lived in the Midwest since college, so about 15 years now. So this just kind of felt like our sweet spot, something that was a little more nuanced, a little more niche, something where we wanted it to be a covering everyone in the Big Ten, not necessarily we're just talking about Ohio State, Michigan, yada yada yada, because there's already so many people out there that cover the team actually who have that inside access that do that well. So wanted it to be something where we're giving a little bit of love to everyone. And it's been a great year for it, because there's been a little bit of upheaval, let's say, in the upper mid part of that Big Ten so far this year.
Yeah, definitely not wrong about that. It's been a fun year for the Big Ten, and I feel like a lot of people have overlooked the Big Ten in the past, right? You kind of want to say, okay, well, it's Ohio State and it's Michigan. Sometimes kind of Penn State maybe, but, not a whole lot of love. Iowa can play some defense, but that's about it, right? And you have a bunch of people that want to kind of just overlook the Big Ten, only look at the big teams. But now that you've seen kind of conference realignment hit first year with these teams from out west, and finally kind of bringing some of that in, it's really brought a lot of attention to the conference. That plus a bunch of teams, I think, playing a lot better than I expected to see them play off the start. Kind of what are some of your initial takes or initial impressions of this first half of the Big Ten? Kind of who's surprised you, maybe who's been a team that maybe let you down a little bit? What are we thinking about the Big Ten about halfway through?
Well, the biggest surprise is definitely Indiana, right? I don't think anybody had 6-0 Indiana on their bingo card. We, in the kind of the 2 months before summer, we had for our fall previews, we had a beat writer or someone who blogs about, covers the team on, just to help us preview, just because it's like you get into the nitty gritty on 18 different teams. Well, what better way to do that than have someone on who actually follows the team, because they're going to know more than you can ever research. And we have Sammy Jacobs does the Hoosier Huddle, and we had him on, and we're going to have him on again next week coming out of the bye to help preview the Nebraska game. And I was listening to that episode again this week to help us prepare for that. And, even talking there, he's like, could I see them going 6-0? I mean, I suppose it's possible. I wouldn't bet on it. If they go 4-2 to start the season, that would be pretty good. And here we are, Indiana 6-0. They're probably going to be a top 15 team after this weekend. Their schedule sets up really nicely to be 10-0 going into Columbus, as long as they don't stub their toe. Did not have that on my bingo card this year. You could put Illinois in that list as well, a team that had a tough year last year, and they're playing ranked primetime games against Penn State a couple of weeks ago. As far as disappointing, I mean, it's got to kind of start and end with the defending national champions, right? I think we kind of all, at least if we were being honest with ourselves, expected them to take a little bit of a step back, given everything that was lost to the draft. Most of the coaching staff moving on to the NFL, the fact that they didn't really have anything established in the quarterback room. And it just seems like every potential question that we had about that team coming into the year has kind of played itself out in real time in the worst way. And, 4-2 or 3-2, whatever they are to start the season, you kind of look at their start of their schedule. I don't think it necessarily played out the way that I thought it would, but they're kind of where I thought they would be at this point. I certainly wasn't high on them as a playoff team, but I certainly thought 9-3 was a possibility. And now looking at what they have to finish the year, we're looking at a team that, 7-5, if things continue to trend poorly, 6-6 is probably not off the table. So that's kind of got to be the big one for me, at least in Big Ten land. You could probably throw USC in there as well, but that's another team I wasn't necessarily They've been weird this year because there was another team where we're not high on, and then they beat LSU, and it's like, well, what does that mean? And maybe it was just 2 8-4 teams that were playing each other to start the season.
Yeah, I think there's a good chance that is what happened there to start the year. I mean, LSU definitely hasn't impressed me on the defensive side of the ball. Garrett Nussmeier, we'll talk about him in a little bit, but definitely impressive to start and really tearing stuff up down here in the SEC. But yeah, definitely Michigan, the disappointment from the group. And I just love talking Indiana. Trey nailed that. He's one of the other guys on the podcast. He absolutely nailed that pick in the offseason. We brought up, who we thought were going to be these big rising teams, and he was trying to stomp us. But guys, Indiana's going to be pretty good this year. And we're both kind of like, okay, we're the hot take artist over here. Look out. But no, he nailed that. And I have firmly planted myself upon the Indiana bandwagon. So happy to be a part of that. And it's been a lot of fun. So we'll hope maybe they can finish out the season pretty strong. Hey, get a signature win. Indiana the playoff isn't necessarily out of the question. So I guess we'll have to see what happens. Guys, we're about to jump into our big 3 games of the week, brought to you by Home Field Apparel. Guys, if you don't know about Home Field Apparel, I don't know where you've been. They've kind of taken over the college apparel realm and across the sport, and we're thrilled to be partnered with them. You can use code 3TechPod for 15% off your entire order. Or if you've gone and shopped with them before, you can use the link in our Twitter, in our Instagram, anywhere you can find us online. Use that link as well. And we are going to start off our big 3 with a couple of these Big Ten teams. Not a traditional Big Ten matchup, but number 2, Ohio State heading up to Eugene, Oregon to play number 3, the Oregon Ducks. This will be at 6:30 p.m. on NBC. And man, let me tell you what, I am excited to watch this one. This has been a game that I have had circled all offseason as one of the premier games of the year, not just of this weekend slate. And both of these teams coming in playing pretty well, but maybe not quite as well as I had expected to see out of both of them. They're both winning games. They're both doing it at a fairly good clip. But the Ohio State offense may be a little bit slower out of the gate than I expected. Oregon, maybe not quite as sharp as I expected. Went real close with a good Boise State team, but probably a little too close. Kind of looking at this matchup, I want to kind of gauge where you are on this one to start. How do we think Ohio State fares in their first big road test? Obviously they went off to play Michigan State on the road. Not necessarily a big test for them, but going up to play at Oregon, it gets loud, it gets crazy. How do we think they do? How do we think they handle that pressure going into that game?
Well, this is just such a weird one, right? Because I think if you looked at the preseason line on this game, I think Oregon was a slight favorite. Certainly not insurmountably so. And I think if you parsed it out, it probably would have essentially been kind of a pick 'em if we were playing this game on a neutral field. But That shifted over the last couple of weeks. And I think last I checked, it was Ohio State -3 now. And I think that's more of a function, not necessarily a comment on how Ohio State's played this year, but more so a comment on how Oregon's been. I think coming into the season, it seemed that, Dylan Gabriel was just getting anointed as, well, this guy's going to be the Heisman frontrunner. He put up big numbers at Oklahoma. We saw what Bo Nix did in this offense last year. It certainly seems like a match made in heaven. And it's not necessarily that it's been a bad fit that I would say. It's just the offense has not been as explosive as it was this past year. You lose Troy Franklin to the NFL, you lose Bucky Irving to the NFL, you lose a couple of good guys on the offensive line to the NFL, and it seems like they've had a tougher time replacing those guys than I think any of us really envisioned. They bring in Evan Stewart out of the transfer portal, and it kind of seemed tailor-made for, all right, we're anointing Tez Johnson into this Troy Franklin #1 role, and Evan Stewart's going to slide into the role that he played last year, and they're not going to miss a beat. And that's really not how it's played out this year. The passing game just not as explosive, a lot of dinking and dunking. On our podcast, Clinton's joked multiple times that Dylan Gabriel needs a Dunkin' Donuts NIL deal because he calls him just Duncan Dillon is what he's been calling him. I'm like, that seems a little harsh, but they don't throw the ball deep all that often. I think we were talking Oregon we're talking this game on our show on Monday night, and one of the guys we had on to help us preview Oregon made a point that they made a change at center a few games ago, and the offensive line seems to have been better since that change has been instituted. They're running the ball better. Jordan James is coming off his best game of the year. I think he had like 140 rushing yards in the first half against Michigan State. And I get it's Michigan State, so there's not really a whole lot that you can necessarily take out of that game, but they seem to be rounding into form at the right time. Their defensive line's been a lot better too. I think a lot of the rushing stats for Oregon are skewed by what Ashton Genty did to them, and that's probably not the fairest comparison, considering he's done that to everyone, and he's doing things that have not been seen in this sport in 35, 40 years.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of like the no-duh comment. This game's going to be won in the trenches. Coming into the year for Ohio State, the questions were on the offensive line. And they've been playing pretty well this year. Early in the year, they were a little banged up. Donovan Jackson seems healthy now, and they've been running the ball certainly well. They have a good 1-2 duo in the backfield, as good as there is in the country. Also strong on the defensive line. I think Ohio State 17 sacks on the season, Oregon 16. So they both get after the quarterback pretty well. They got a lot of talent, both teams in the front seven. It seems like that's going to be where this game is won and lost. Which of these front sevens, which of these offensive lines shows up and has the better game?
Yeah, I think you're probably going to end up being right on that one. It's a lot of times you look at these teams and it's all, kind of the passing. You see the quarterbacks, the receivers, and you try to look at these big time matchups and you just think, well, the guys are highly rated. And so, we expect them to play well. But that really, I don't think is probably going to end up being the case in this one. When I was looking at this game, obviously, Ohio State comes in -- 1 scoring defense. They're giving up 6.8 points per game. I know they really haven't played anybody, and Iowa certainly doesn't have a pulse on offense. And so take those numbers for what they are. There's a couple of those teams we'll talk about tonight. But I think when you look at this, the quarterback numbers are a little bit similar. But again, you were talking about it, a little bit of a different thing. I think more inconsistency from what I've seen out of Will Howard versus Dylan Gabriel. I love the Duncan Dillon, a little bit of a check down merchant for him, and just kind of getting his job done. The completion percentage is impressive, but I guess it's easy to hit a guy when he's just a couple yards upfield. For me, when I was looking at this, I love the run game from both sides. I think I'd go Ohio State's way when I'm looking run game. Right, you love Quinshon Judkins, you love Travion Henderson, and Jordan James is really coming into his own. For me, I think it's a freshness question, right? It's just going to be, you got two guys versus one guy. Jordan James can absolutely tote the rock, and I think he'll find some success in this game. But, man, can he stay fresh enough? Can they give him 20, 25, push 30 carries? I don't think he can do that, and they still have success versus, I think you can kind of give Quinshon or Travion maybe 10 to 12 each, and you probably end up liking the way that they're running this thing even in the fourth. But I am curious about this. So you talked about the wide receiver position a little bit. Ohio State clearly has the edge, I think, at the wide receiver position. But I'm curious how much that affects, and obviously with the higher completion percentage for Gabriel, maybe less talent out there, though, who do you think is going to make the bigger plays in this one from the quarterback spot, right? You got a couple guys new to the program starting to kind of, again, play this first big test of the season for both of them. I have a feeling this is going to come down to making some big time throws on third down, trying to move some chains, flip the field, make some chunk plays. Who do you think, if it comes down to that, is going to be able to make the bigger play?
Oh, that's a good question. We haven't really needed to see that from Will Howard yet. And, we're talking about two guys who, there hasn't been a ton of game pressure on them this year, but these are guys who at their last stops both played in big time moments. With Red River this week too, we've seen the Dylan Gabriel highlights from last year leading that nails drive to win the game at the end. But we're also talking about a Will Howard who beat number 3 TCU to win a Big 12 title a couple of years ago. He probably had his best game of the season in an overtime loss against Texas last year. So there are two guys who have done it before, even though it hasn't really been asked of them this year. I still have some questions about Will Howard's ability to be a difference maker in the pass game. So if I were to lean one over the other, I would probably lean Gabriel just because I've seen maybe a little bit more from him this year. And again, that's a function of Will Howard hasn't been asked to do much. I think I think it was Bill Connolly. He tweeted it out, and in the graphic, it was talking about offensive efficiency when the game probability, like ESPN's game probability, had the win percent between 10 and 90%. And what I took away from this graphic is Ohio State's offense has only run 13 snaps this year when the win probability was between 10 and 90%, which is essentially saying that they have had like no game pressure at all this season, which through 5 games is insane. Just insane how dominant they've been. And I get, again, they haven't played anyone, but on the road, I think you got to give the edge to the home quarterback in this one.
Sure. I definitely can't disagree with that. I do think, looking at this, you were saying they're both coming from big time situations where they've had to play big games. I do think that's going to help both of them in this spot, right? You talked about the Red River shootout and being able to talk about that. I also would look, again, a couple years back, you can talk about the Big 12 championship game and Will Howard and him having to kind of lead some big time drives down the stretch there, and loving what both of these quarterbacks do. I love talking about those. So when we get to this, Ohio State right now, 3-point favorite. And I guess what do we have on the over-under? Over-under 53.5 right now. You don't necessarily need to pick the total on this one, but looking for a score, looking for a projection here. What are we thinking? How do you think this one plays out?
Well, I'm smashing the under. I just absolutely going to smash the under.
Sweet.
I think it's going to be kind of one of those feel it out type games early. First big game of the year, really first game with a pulse. I mean, no disrespect to Boise or Iowa, but first time that you're really playing someone who can punch back this year. I think there's going to be a little bit of feeling it out early. I think both teams are going to try to establish the run early in this one, but it's just based on what I've seen this year. It's really hard to pick against Ohio State right now. Just both sides of the ball. I mean, the defense is probably the best defense in the country. I think they can affect Dylan Gabriel a little bit more than Oregon's defense is going to be able to affect Will Howard. And I mean, we've seen Oregon's defense already get exploited by a quality running game once this year. Again, how much of that is the running back himself versus the overall scheme? But, Ohio State's coming at you with 2 really talented guys. I think Trey Henderson gets a little bit lost in the shuffle just because, he's been hurt for a lot of his Ohio State career, but we're talking about a guy who was a 5-star coming out of college. So he certainly has the talent. If he could stay healthy, he probably wouldn't be on this roster right now. He'd probably be in the NFL. And then obviously Quinshon Judkins' resume speaks for itself. And, you touched on the freshness factor. I think both of them are averaging like 10, 11 yards per yards or 10 or 11 carries per game this year.
Right.
So they're not getting used. They should be plenty fresh for this game. I think there's just too many weapons on both sides of the ball for Ohio State. I think it'll be close. I am not confident in a cover, probably something, like a 28-24, 27-24 in that range.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. When I wrote this down, I have Ohio State winning 28-24 right now. I think end of the day, a lot of this is just an even matchup. A lot of this comes down to being, good versus good. You don't really find a whole lot of difference makers. For me, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, the difference is for me in the wide receiver cores. I just trust Ohio State's wide receivers to make plays on those 50-50 balls a little bit more than I trust Oregon's wide receivers. And look, Oregon has the talent at wide receiver to show up and do it in this game. You just got to show me before I can actually believe that I'm going to see it on the field. And until I see it, I just can't really believe it from Oregon. So give me Ohio State as well. We're both on the Buckeyes to win this one. And from there, we go on to our second game of our big 3. And we are heading down to my neck of the woods, heading to Dallas, Texas, where you will find Big Tex. You'll find some of the best fried food you've ever had. Fried food so good, you're almost happy it's killing you. And the historic Cotton Bowl at Fair Park, where you will find, once again, Texas versus Oklahoma, the Red River rivalry, the Red River shootout. we're excited for this one. Obviously, first iteration of this one in the SEC, and pretty big stakes in this one. I think a lot of people coming in to the season didn't expect a bunch out of Oklahoma. They have a tough schedule, turning a lot of stuff over. New quarterback they're trying to figure out. He didn't work out. But now they get a new guy in Michael Hawkins Jr. that looked pretty good against Auburn. But they come into this one. This will be 2:30 on ABC. My big question for this one is all about Quinn Ewers, right? Quinn Ewers injured the last several weeks, coming back off of that injury. But game speed and practice speed and health versus like actually feeling good, those are all very relative terms. And I'm curious to see how Quinn Ewers is going to look coming out of this one. I guess the big question for me and the big question going into this one, not just about Quinn, but will Texas, if Quinn comes out maybe a little slow, what is the pressure on Texas to go to Arch? How do they handle all that? I'm curious to kind of see what your thoughts are on the Texas offense and how they're going to look with Quinn.
Yeah, that's I think that's the big point here, right? Is how healthy is he? If he's not 100%, we're talking about an Oklahoma defense that even after getting shredded a little bit by Auburn last week, I think they had 500 yards almost in that game. Oklahoma's still 42nd in total defense, but they're 5th in the country in sacks. So they're certainly going to get after you. And if, you get a weird hit early in the game, you get hit a little hard, land a little funky on that arm, how are you feeling after that? Because certainly Arch has come in and he's done nothing to quiet the calls for the move over to him. I mean, he's been statistically dominant this year. Again, level of competition, not the greatest, but there's something to be said for coming in and taking care of business. So I think that could potentially be a fascinating subplot in this game, particularly if, we're talking about a 10-7, 14-10 game at halftime. Texas is struggling to move the ball. Does the crowd start to get a little antsy? How does that affect the team if they're kind of noticing, hey, the vibes in the stadium aren't necessarily the best right now. It's one of those things though, that, I mean, if you're confident as a Texas staff that Quinn is healthy, he's shown you nothing so far this year to question having him in there, right?
Right. Yeah, so he's got to be the guy, right? I mean, you don't lose your starting job unless the backup clearly takes it from you. Mm-hmm. And Quinn's no scrub. He's not a bad quarterback. And in a game that is rarely a blowout, right? It's happened. We've seen blowouts in this game, but this game is rarely a blowout. And it also rarely matters who the better team is. This game is almost always close. And you'll see teams play up or down to the other guy that you'll see, and especially in a rivalry game, you'll see guys come up and down from that. This game, I think, is going to be a lot closer than a lot of people expect. The line here is at -14. I don't see a way for Oklahoma to not cover that. I know people are in love with Texas's offense, but Oklahoma, like you said, pretty solid defense there. For me, the big question comes on the other side of the football where, if you're Oklahoma, I mentioned it off the top, Jackson Arnold did not work out. That game against Tennessee kind of brought out some stuff and exposed him. And so they've turned to Michael Hawkins Jr. And he didn't necessarily do anything special against Auburn, but he looked good in the limited opportunities. I think he threw 15 passes and completed 10 of them and, led drives and did what he needed to do. He had that 2-point conversion as well, where he kind of jumps over everybody, gets the inspired look, right? And the whole team gets around him and hypes him up. So, if you had a new guy like that, not the guys that, Texas clearly was planning for, both teams coming off a bye week, so you got a little film on him, but not the guy you came into the season thinking you were playing. But Texas comes in with a number 2 scoring defense, again, like Ohio State, not having really played anybody. I'm curious what you think about that side of the ball. Can Oklahoma do anything on that side of the ball? Are they going to be able to score points at all? What's the path? What's the path for them to score points?
Well, you got to hope that Deion Burks is healthy. Because otherwise it's however good Michael Hawkins is, if he doesn't really have anyone to throw the ball to, that's not going to help a lot. So, and I think they just actually released the availability report. So Anderson's out, Gibson's still out, Anthony's still out, Farouk is still out, and they said Burks is a game time decision. So, I mean, if he comes back, then you at least have a weapon out wide to throw to, but we've already seen Texas shut down a Michigan offense this year that does not have a functional passing game, and they certainly run the ball better than Oklahoma has this year. So it's probably going to take getting creative with the quarterback run game, rolling Michael Hawkins out, giving him kind of that, hey, here's your one read. If it's not open, just take off and try to get something type of offense, a little backyard football, if you will. But It's going to be tough sledding for them to score because I mean it's still a good Texas D. Even if the level of competition so far hasn't been great, it's still going to be a tough D to score against. So I'm kind of with you on this. I think it's going to be uncomfortably close from a Texas fan perspective. I don't think it's going to be a blowout, but I struggle to see a path for Oklahoma to score enough to get past Texas, regardless who's playing quarterback for the Longhorns.
Definitely. Yeah, I think Oklahoma, the key for them is going to be try to make Texas one-dimensional. This is one of the big places I want to key in on that Texas offense. None of the Longhorns running backs have really impressed me that much this year. They've got talent back there, but nobody's really stood out as like, you got to know where this guy is. Watch him coming out of the backfield. He's a serious difference maker, right? And none of them have really shown me enough of that consistently to think that Texas is going to do enough in the run game. So for me, I'm looking at this saying Oklahoma, plug up those lanes early and turn Texas into a one-dimensional team as quick as you can, because you got to force some mistakes. You got to try to get an interception, pick a ball off, get a short field, right? Something like that, because you're probably right. There's not a lot of ways that I think they move the ball consistently on this Texas defense. I think we're both probably on Texas to win this one. I'd be surprised if you're on Oklahoma on this one. Do you think Texas covers this 14?
No, I think it'll probably end up being a little bit lower scoring than we're probably anticipating. Probably a real mucky, grimy type of game. Probably not too all that dissimilar from what we just were talking about with Ohio State and Oregon. So I think Texas probably scores in the upper 20s. And I mean, maybe Oklahoma gets a late score to kind of backdoor cover this one. But I think Oklahoma covers, but I don't know that it's necessarily kind of a game that's ever really in doubt.
Yeah, Texas, by far the more talented team here. I think the better coach team, more, further along in their program at the very least. And I just think the Texas is too much for this one. I don't think that they cover that 14. I think they probably pull away a little bit late, maybe get into a, needing to extend, kick a field goal to put it out of reach type of thing, lead by 10 at the end of the game, something like that. I think they can probably win this one by about 10 over Oklahoma, but I would be surprised if they pull away and win this one by a large margin. Though I guess after last Saturday, anything could happen, and maybe this is just another crazy SEC weekend. Speaking of the SEC, going from a new version of an SEC game to kind of an old SEC game that we're used to seeing, we head to Baton Rouge, where we find the number 9 Ole Miss Rebels, a 3.5-point favorite against number 12 LSU, 6:30 p.m. on ABC. And man, I want to go to Peter Burns on this one. Not typically the biggest fan of Peter Burns. He's got some good stuff, but his Twitter game really does turn it up sometimes. He says this: I legit have 0.0% idea what happens with LSU and Ole Miss this weekend. There truly is not an outcome in which I would be surprised. Blowout, close game, national scandal, aliens, everything is on the table. Prepare accordingly. I saw that tweet maybe 2 hours ago, and I just thought, that's probably about right.
Yeah.
And so for me, when I look at this one, obviously Ole Miss coming into this one on a little bit of a cold streak, losing a couple weekends ago to Kentucky, not exactly bouncing back against South Carolina. They beat them pretty good, but not a very good South Carolina team, and definitely didn't look as good as I expected them to look in their win versus South Carolina. Dart completes 51% of his passes. They averaged 3.4 yards per carry in this one. Not exactly what you want to see from this Ole Miss offense that's supposed to be pretty highly touted. They're coming in to play an LSU defense that doesn't seem like it can get a stop anywhere. And so maybe a weakness on weakness type of situation. What do you think it's going to take for Ole Miss to get back on track against LSU on the road?
Well, it could just be as simple as playing LSU secondary, right? We're talking about a team that's they're 102nd in pass efficiency defense this year, which seems like a problem when Jackson Dart's your quarterback, and seemingly your wide receiver position group is the strength of your offense. So I really hope it's kind of like the game we had last year when nobody got a stop and they just kept going back and forth up and down the field over and over and over again until the clock finally hit 0. But I don't know if it's necessarily going to be that, because I mean, obviously we don't have the Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas aspect of this from LSU anymore, but I don't know what to make of this LSU team. Right. So the loss to start the year against USC, which doesn't exactly look the best considering what's happened to the Trojans since then. And then you struggle against an FCS team, and then you find yourself down by a bunch early against that same South Carolina team that Ole Miss just struggled with again. But this was, to be fair, a pre-ankle injury, Lenora Sellers.
Sure.
And then you struggle with LSU too for a half of football. And LSU's probably only going to win one game, or UCLA, sorry, is only going to win. Yeah, they're only going to win a game this year. I don't know if UCLA is going to win another game this year. So you get a little bit of a get-right game against South Alabama 2 weeks ago before the bye. I think it kind of comes down to, from the run game, from the LSU perspective, Caden Durham coming in, he's been a little hot and cold the last couple of weeks. He had a couple of good games sandwiched between kind of a stinker against UCLA. So can they get a little bit from him and try to control the clock a little bit, keep Jackson Dart off the field? But I feel like we've seen like two different versions of each of these teams so far this year. So I have no earthly clue on which one of them is going to show up. If both good versions show up, I think we could be in for a hell of a game. But, if you get bad LSU showing up and good Ole Miss, it's going to go bad that direction. You get good LSU showing up, the Ole Miss that showed up against Kentucky, it's going to be a blowout in the other direction. I'm with the Pete Burns tweet on this one. I have no earthly clue on what's going to happen or what to expect from this game.
Right. And I think when you look at this, there's a lot of defensive flaws for LSU, but one thing that's stayed the same, kind of surprisingly to me, is they've scored points. Like at the end of the game, they end up scoring a bunch of points, and definitely up and down. Not a great game, obviously, to start against USC, but I'm really coming on. You mentioned Caden Durham, pride of Duncanville High School. I know Mitch would want me to shout that one out. He got to call games for them a little bit, so that's a fun one that we like, rooting for him for sure. But, man, Garrett Nussmeier has been really solid for LSU. I've been really impressed with him, throwing the ball a whole bunch, but he's averaging 330 yards per game on almost 70% completions and leads the SEC with 15 touchdowns right now. That's impressive considering he just came off of a bye, and he still leads the league in touchdowns and all that. I'm curious to kind of see, for me, he's probably the guy that I think has the biggest impact on this game. If Nussmeier shows up and keeps slinging this thing around the yard, I think it's going to be tough for Ole Miss to keep up in a shootout. But I'm curious to see who you think, maybe it's Nussmeier, maybe it's somebody else. Who do you think, if you had to pick one player, is going to have the biggest impact on the result of this game?
I think I'm going to go, same vein, right? Kind of the LSU offense. I'm going to go Kyron Lacey. He real big impact in that first half against USC, and then kind of they stopped going to him in the second half. And look at that, USC got back into the game then. Can they get him the ball early? Can they kind of get some separation, get a couple chunk plays early out of him? But I like the Nussmeier call too. Ole Miss pass defense been pretty decent so far this year, but that might be more of an effect of their schedule's been atrocious up until they got into SEC play. So that might be a little bit more of an effect of that. But obviously a good test for them this weekend to kind of see if that's for real or if it's just hey, you're kind of a paper tiger, no pun intended.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned the defense as well. They come in with the third ranked scoring defense, but again, just like the previous two teams we talked about, Texas and Ohio State, hadn't really played a whole lot in terms of a good offense. And so I think you're right. We're kind of waiting to see what can we get out of this defense when they finally play a team with a little bit of a pulse, or if you're, South Carolina, a team where your quarterback's ankle is fine. And so I think we're kind of waiting to see what happens there. For me in this one, talking to Peter Burns and his tweets, he doesn't know what's happening. I'm not real sure about this one. If I'm putting this one in my prize pool, I'm putting this one in the lowest possible confidence that I have. No lockups on this one at all. But I just don't think Ole Miss is going to be able to compete in a shootout. I think this will probably turn into a bit of a shootout. I think you're going to see teams going up and down the field in this one. I think you're probably going to end up seeing some unforced errors be the downfall for Ole Miss, and could see a little bit of pass rush get home for LSU, and other things get crazy down there on Baton Rouge. So I think LSU probably pulls this one out in the swamp. I'm curious to kind of see which way you're going on this one.
I don't know who wins, but I will take LSU in the points. Give me the home field. Give me, Nussmeier's been just, I don't want to say necessarily better than Jackson Dart so far this year. He certainly had a good start to the year, but I think I'm going to trust Garrett a little bit more in this one.
Definitely. It truly wouldn't surprise me either way. I do think one thing I'm willing to say is the last play of this game is almost certainly going to be either a Hail Mary or a field goal. Like you're going to see one or the other, where it's just some big attempt. I don't see a victory formation in this one. Could be wrong. Maybe one of these teams really pulls away. Maybe get a late pick or something like that. But man, I think this is probably going to go down to the absolute wire and bated breath in Baton Rouge. But I think that I think the Bayou Bengals get it done. I think they'll get it done this week. Whichever team loses, though, almost certainly out of the playoff talk. Or at the very least, their playoff talk is on life support, and they got to do some real good stuff on the way out of the season. And I guess we'll see what happens. The playoff picture with 12 teams already kind of muddying things up as well. So that's going to do it for our big three. That's going to be our three big games of the week. Let us know what you guys think in the comments on those three games. We're going to move into our Saturday storylines presented by Baller Pickleball. Trey's been big on that Baller Pickleball bandwagon. You can go ahead and use your code 3TechPod at ballerpickleball.com. You can get 10% off your entire order there. Can Alabama get right against a desperate, we just talked about him, South Carolina squad? Alabama, of course, the embarrassing loss to Vanderbilt, unexplicable. You watch the Paul Feinbaum show at all and see the guys calling in and screaming and hollering, saying some of the worst possible takes I've ever heard in my life. But they're not happy with Kalen DeBoer right now. Very, very fast how that good grace from beating Georgia just flew out of the window after losing to Vanderbilt for the first time since, I believe, Reagan was president. That was a long time ago. Curious to see what you think. Alabama against South Carolina. South Carolina 3-2, maybe struggling a little bit. Does Lenora Sellers get healthy? Rocket Sanders coming back a little bit from an injury as well. Can Alabama get it right against this South Carolina team?
I'm more fascinated to see if Kalen DeBoer is going to go polo this week, or if he's just going to completely go the opposite direction and go some jorts and a cutoff T-shirt to just say, you know what, you want to talk about my wardrobe? I'll give you something to talk about here. This just feels like a bad place to be South Carolina, man, because Alabama's going to come out pissed off, fired up, ready to make a statement. And I don't know that South Carolina has enough of the dudes to be able to withstand the onslaught that is about to come. I really like Dylan Stewart. If he can get going, I think he can kind of create some problems. We saw Vandy get after Jalen Milroe a little bit last week. I think he can create some problems for this Alabama offense, but you're going to need more than just him making plays on defense because, Milroe with his legs, Jam Miller out of the backfield. Ryan Williams is probably going to do something ridiculous again. That seems like a weekly occurrence at this point. And if you don't have Rocket Sanders and Lenora Sellers completely healthy, I just don't know how you score enough to keep up with Alabama in this one.
No, I'm right there with you. I almost think there's no way Bama drops this one. I think they bounce back in a big way. Look, I don't think DeBoer can do anything to fix what he's done with the fans this week, but he could definitely make it worse. There's no way that he can make things worse. And, I don't want to talk hot seat in year one, but if there's anywhere he can do it, maybe Bama. And they'll get certainly pretty upset over there. Yeah, I think you're right about that. You're going to need a healthy Lenoris, and you're going to need a healthy Rocket Sanders. I don't really see a path, though, for South Carolina because the path for Vanderbilt, yes, there was a lot they were doing with the quarterback run game and the option game, but it was the option that turned into passing down the field as well. And I don't see that threat right now from South Carolina. I don't think that they can do the same thing. Maybe they can catch them off guard. If Vandy gave us the blueprint for beating Bama this year, then I guess, that's the blueprint. Thanks a bunch, Commodores. But I just don't see it from South Carolina this week. So I'm going to go with Alabama as well in this one. Penn State needing a good defensive effort again. Going up against USC, a vaunted Trojan offense, but maybe hasn't quite played like it so far. Right now, things spiraling for the Trojans. I just don't trust Lincoln Riley to get the ship right. USC currently 58th in scoring offense, and that is not good for a Lincoln Riley-led team. Penn State, again, top 10 defense, should clamp down and hand the Trojans a third loss here. I think they need to take another little level in the explosiveness if you're Penn State. Want to see a little bit more out of that last game. It's been good. I can't really complain about it. But I think if you're Drew Aller, you want to see yourself take that next step as well.
Yeah, after that first game against West Virginia, I think we kind of all started drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit with the Andy Kotelnicki offense. Oh man, they're starting to throw the ball downfield. Trey Wallace looks like a guy that they can rely on outside. Tyler Warren at tight end, they've been kind of using him as a utility knife this year. They got good pieces there, but I think for Penn State, the key to this game is, does Nick Singleton play? Because he did not last week in the running game, suffered against UCLA. And I don't know how much of that was, we're holding back. We're kind of looking through UCLA. We should sleepwalk and beat these guys. And they slept walk and they definitely beat them. That game was never in doubt despite the final score. But they're definitely, Singleton's their most talented player on offense. You take the most talented player off any offense, they're not going to look particularly great. But if he does not play, I think that gives USC a path. The good news for USC is even if they start slowly again, I don't know that Penn State's shown enough on offense that has me believing that it would be an insurmountable advantage or anything like that. This certainly is probably going to be, no disrespect to Michigan's defense, but the best defense USC has faced this year. And their Penn State defense is rounded into form, man. They Abdul Carter moved to edge from linebacker in the offseason, and he's starting to round into form big time. That is a scary dude coming off the edge. So the only kind of question I have in this one from a Penn State perspective is they got a real messed up travel day to get there. They're having to drive 2 hours to get to an airport that's big enough to fly them across the country. But I think that's been kind of a thing that people have been talking about, is that time zone travel with the new Big Ten. I saw a stat today that teams that are based in the Eastern time zone, when they're playing a game that involves travel, like one of the teams traveling from Eastern time to Pacific time, the team that is favored is 10-3 straight up. So
wow.
That's bodes well for Penn State. I think they're probably a little bit more talented. I don't think the talent advantage is insurmountable, but I like their defense better. Miller Moss has been fine, but 4 interceptions the last 3 games, that's certainly not going to cut it against this Penn State defense. The last thing you want to do is give Penn State offense a short field and help them out when they've been struggling to move the ball a little bit. But USC is going to have to start a lot quicker than they have the last 3 weeks. Or I think this one, I don't think it'll get ugly, but it could be over by midway through the third quarter then.
Yeah, I think you got a point there. Not trending the right direction if you're the Trojans. Definitely trying to get right, and a win over Penn State could do that for you. But I think Penn State's the better team here. Should be in a good spot coming out of this one. Let's talk about Pitt real quick. Didn't think we'd be talking about Pitt at any point in time this season going into the year. But now we're talking about Pitt playing Cal. And if they win, could be 6-0 and maybe a contender in the ACC. Pitt currently 6th in scoring offense. Eli Holstein really coming on, looks to be like a real weapon. He should keep developing. Hope he sticks at Pitt. That'd be fun to kind of watch them go, but I can't imagine he's not going to get a call from somebody through the portal. A win here, I think, puts him in a good spot in the ACC. Curious to see what you think about whether or not they could be contenders to maybe make it to that ACC championship game. If not, maybe win the whole thing.
Make it, yes, just because the ACC is fascinating because there's so much like right in that top third that I have no idea how it's going to play out. Like we had Clemson was DOA after playing Georgia, and then they've come out and beat the absolute snot out of, what was it? App State, NC State. NC State, everyone's beaten up NC State. So that's maybe not that big of an accomplishment, but it struggled a little bit with Florida State last week. They still cover, but certainly didn't look as explosive in that game as we've seen teams look against Florida State this year. But, looking at Pitt's schedule, I don't really know who the toughest team that they've played so far is. Maybe North Carolina, who isn't that good. But the back half of their schedule coming out of a bye week, man, they got some interesting games here. You got Q's, SMU, Virginia, Clemson, Louisville, and BC. That's a lot of aggressively competent teams that can get you if you're not playing at your best. So 6-0 Pitt, I think, would be a fantastic story. And I agree with you. I'd love to see Eli Holstein stick it out at Pitt because this sport is far more interesting when you got dudes like that putting up numbers at a program like Pitt and making that race far more interesting. I love it when we get these not necessarily name brand teams that are making noise kind of in that playoff discussion. But I still think that there's a back half of this schedule that I could very much see Pitt going 3-3, in which, if they win this week, that still gets you to 9-3, which I'm sure Pitt fans would have taken that 10 times out of 10 if you told them that before the season. But definitely a team to watch for sure.
Yeah, and you're right about that 9-3. We did Pitt in our first group of the ACC previews, and that means that they were not very good. We went in ascending order up to the top of the conference, and because they made our first episode, we didn't expect them to be very good. But here we are looking at a Pitt team that, I mean, never say never, right? I mean, it's not a bad. It's not a great defense, but they play okay on defense. Definitely score a bunch to kind of stick with anybody. But yeah, you're right. I mean, they host Clemson. I think the road games to SMU and Louisville are going to be where the season's kind of made or lost. I don't really see a way for them to beat Clemson in season unless you just see kind of another, complete fall apart from Clemson. But could see them. I mean, SMU and Louisville being a couple games, could see them maybe splitting those. I hope they don't lose both, right? You'd like to see them find a way to 10-2. Could be interesting. But yeah, hard to see them, maybe getting out of that group undefeated or even 11-1. It's just really tough to see them getting out of that with, more than one win. And so, yeah, I'm hoping for Pitt, not necessarily believing in Pitt as much, but it's been a fun storyline and definitely excited to kind of watch how they progress. And as long as he can score points, I'm, never going to say never. So we'll see that. I think they probably roll Cal. Cal, not necessarily that impressive. The defense, maybe a little bit more maligned than we should, but after that comeback loss that they gave up to Miami, I don't think we can believe too much in Cal on this one. Yeah, so that's what to look for there. A couple of games in the G5 that you should definitely turn your TV to at some point. Battle between a couple of MACtion favorites heading up your direction. And we're going to look at NIU and Bowling Green. A game that maybe not a lot of people had circled in the MAC preseason, but if you knew what you were talking about, you probably expected a bunch out of these two teams. NIU, legit defense. I mean, held Notre Dame down in that, that one. And, Bowling Green, they got some real playmakers on that offense. I like Bazelak in this one. I like his ability to have some experience, put them up over the top. NIU defense, Bowling Green offense. Where do we think this one breaks?
This has been kind of one of those where I think heading into the season, you kind of mentioned it, not two teams that we were necessarily looking at, but based on the first 3 weeks of the season and the efforts that these teams put out, oh, wow, we're looking at two teams like, NIU was getting some G5 playoff love there for a hot second and then decided that they were going to poop their pants the next 2 weeks
they
after
forgot
that.
How to play football, yeah.
And you know what? Bowling Green did the same thing. They gave A&M a game, and then the following week they lost to Old Dominion. So it's not following through up here in my neck of the woods here. I am freely going to admit that I am biased on this one. I'm going with my alma mater. I like the offense a little bit more. You guys saw him well when they played down at A&M. Harold Fannin is a legitimate stud.
Yeah,
9 catches a game this year. He's got 676 yards already. He's going to be a guy that I think in 5 years we're going to be talking about as a legitimate top 5 tight end in the NFL. Yeah. Really athletic. They can do a lot with him. They're giving him running jet sweeps with him last week against Akron. And NIU does not pass the ball very well at all. They just Ethan Hampton has, I think they only attempted like 9 passes last week against UMass. They run well. Bowling Green is gettable on the ground. Their pass defense has been a little bit better. They each of the last 2 weeks allowed over 5 yards per carry. So if there's a path to NIU getting it in this one, it would be on the ground where they've been a little bit better than through the air. But give me the Falcons at home. I like the quarterback advantage with Bazelak. Plus, if Terry and Stewart in the backfield's healthy, they have probably the 2 best skill players in this game.
Definitely. And you're right about the NIU run game maybe being able to get them. I don't trust them to be able to sustain drives across the course of an entire 60-minute football game. Not consistently, right? They'll be able to probably score a couple of those, but you get to key in on the run game, and even if they've had issues on the ground for Bowling Green, not really worried about them being able to take down a one-dimensional offense, so to speak. So I'm with you right there on Bowling Green. Our other kind of big one to watch in the G5, Memphis heading to USF. They're going to Tampa. This game got moved to Saturday because of Hurricane Milton. This is kind of a weird spot, right? This is a weird one where, you're playing under different circumstances, right? Because of the hurricane, obviously, first off, thoughts and prayers going out to them, hoping everyone's doing okay there. Hoping there's not too many people in town left, right? You want to make sure everybody evacuated, got out of there. But, assuming that this game gets played and that there's no logistical issues with this one, I normally would want to say Memphis in this spot. but circumstances can make this one weird, right? Does USF come out inspired and, they want to come out there, put on for the city, or do they come out a little bit flat because they're distracted? Like, I'm not really sure which way I want to go in this one. Don't really have a good read on this one, but I think if you had to make me pick, I'm going to trust Seth Hennigan right now. Hasn't been as good this year as I expected him to be, but still a lot of experience there and a lot of talent at the quarterback spot. I think I'm going to roll with the Tigers to win this one on the road.
Yeah, I agree with you. We're talking about a USF team that just got completely crushed by Tulane last week, gave up 30 first downs, 530 yards, and Memphis' offense is probably the best individual unit in this game. So that offense against a defense that's 125th in total defense this year, I'm also going to take Memphis on this one. And Memphis' only losses against Navy, who's
it's a good
really,
Navy team.
Really good this year.
Yeah. And that's one of the ones that we've been talking about, just showing the service academies love. Army and Navy both looking pretty good, and it had a fun stat. I think this is the first time both of them had started this well since like we went to go fight in World War II or came back from winning it or something like that. So it's a lot of fun. Now I'm here for service academies. We're all about the find a way to get one of these guys in the playoff and go win the American or something like that. So it could be a fun one to watch. But yeah, going Memphis in this one. We're both going to roll with the Tigers. Other G5 that you might want to keep your eye on, UNLV goes to Utah State on Friday night. That's another one of those possible playoff contenders out of the G5. Kind of watching them, Boise State, a couple of those other teams. So just kind of want to see what they do. Obviously, another Friday night game for them. I'll be locked in there. Tennessee right now, this is the one that I want to talk about. Tennessee on upset alert, possibly in back-to-back weeks going up against Florida. Obviously, the down week against Arkansas, they're reeling from that one on the road. They're going to play Florida here, and Florida's not a world beater, but Florida's playing a little bit better recently. They go out there, they beat UCF last week. Kind of curious to see where you lean in this one. Does Tennessee get back on track, or is this a big upset spot for the Gators?
Yeah, I think this is kind of similar to talking about that Oklahoma game where the defensive numbers for Florida are a lot worse than they are for Oklahoma, but they're a team that does get after the quarterback well. So if they can kind of wreak some havoc up front and get Nico rattled a little bit early in this game, get them out of rhythm, maybe we kind of see this play out somewhat similar to how it played out last week against Arkansas where they struggled to move the ball. The issue for Florida, though, is 100th in pass efficiency defense. So if you let that offense get in a roll early, then I think this one it gets over pretty quickly. And, Florida has not been bad on offense this year. And you certainly just touched on that a little bit there. So they certainly have a path to scoring and staying in this game, but Tennessee second in the nation in total defense, certainly a better defense than they faced this year. So kind of same deal with Alabama against South Carolina. Probably not a great week to be Florida. You probably would have wished that Tennessee kind of came back and got the win last week. So maybe they're not as on guard coming into this one. Rivalry game, I get anything weird can happen, but I can't see Tennessee laying an egg 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah, it would definitely surprise me. For me in this one, this is a big week for Nico. It's a big one for him to prove that he can win the game because the formula for them so far in SEC play has been stop the run. And that's really what their offense does really well. They've had great success on the ground. For me, Nico hasn't necessarily impressed as much once we've hit SEC play. Looking at the way that they've looked during SEC play, again, 2 games, but averaging 19.5 points per game and 338 yards per game. Not exactly the Tennessee offense we were promised those first couple weeks of the season. And the formula has been the same for both Oklahoma and for Arkansas. It's just stuff the run, right? Stuff the run. Don't let them get anything on the ground. Force Nico to try to beat you. Nico beat Oklahoma with that. Couldn't do it against Arkansas. If Mertz can take care of the football, not turn the ball over like Oklahoma did, that might be your path to success. Arkansas kind of showed you that. So Florida has a chance here. I do not trust the ultimate check down merchant and Graham Mertz. Don't think he's going to make a play in this one. I think that they're going to be a little too predictable and easy to play on that offensive side. They're playing better. They're definitely playing better, and it wouldn't shock me. But Tennessee is going to get back on track in this one. They're going to try to save their season and get this back in the right place. Here's the controversial, maybe online take of the week. Get ready. The fan bases are coming for you. This weekend, between Kansas State and Colorado, who gets back on track? Who grabs the headline? Who comes out in this one? I got to take my deep breath here. I think it's probably Colorado. That might be controversial to say. I like the way that Shadur has been looking. He's been looking a little bit better. Going out and dominating UCF is definitely no small task. They went out there, played really well against a good UCF team. Travis Hunter's a baller. And for me, I've been saying it for a couple of weeks now. I just will not trust Kansas State until they can prove they can throw the football. Avery Johnson's a good quarterback. He's a talented quarterback. He hasn't shown me enough with the arm yet to show that he can be a consistent threat in the pass game. I don't like Colorado's defense all that much, but if they can maybe play a little better and keep making those marginal improvements, we've already seen Kansas State lay an egg. The hype train's going to start running out of control if Colorado can win this one.
Yeah, did we write Colorado off too early? Because it seemed like after Nebraska, we kind of just left them for dead and said we don't have to talk about these guys this year. And all they've done is win since then. Impressively, too. I mean, that was a big game last week. You kind of touched on the issues with the Kansas State offense, and I'm with you on this one. I think we kind of got out over our skis on Avery Johnson a little bit, considering what he showed in limited role last year, and seeing is how Kansas State basically said thanks, but no thanks to Will Howard, who's now piloting the number 2 team in the nation. Well, but you touched on the Colorado defense, but I don't know that Kansas State's shown that they're going to be able to take advantage of that secondary. They're only 108th in passing offense, 68th in pass efficiency. They run the ball well. DJ Giddens a really good back, and if I think they can get him and Avery Johnson working in tandem with a little bit of that RPO game early and get in rhythm, they could have some success with that. The issue is Colorado is exceptionally explosive on offense with the weapons that they have, and they're going against a Kansas State defense that is 100th in the nation in pass defense and 70th in pass efficiency defense. So a very gettable Kansas State secondary, and if this game becomes a shootout, I have more faith in Colorado's offense to be able to put up points in a hurry versus Kansas State's offense, which seems like it's needed to move a little bit more methodically to score this year.
Yeah, and I think there's a good chance this formula is the same as the UCF game for Colorado, where you have a quarterback who's more of a run-first quarterback. He can throw a little bit, but not necessarily impressive. I think KJ is a better passer than Avery Johnson. I'm not going to diss on KJ too much. But they're definitely a run-first team at UCF. They want to run the football. They want to dominate time of possession. They want to take you and take you behind the woodshed and make you pick out the switch and all that. But that just didn't happen for UCF. Colorado stood up to it. They knew what they wanted to do. They had a good game plan, and they figured it out. I think that's kind of the same thing Kansas State wants to do. Kansas State's better at it, I think, than UCF is, but I just don't think unless you can have a consistent pass attack that you're really going to be a threat here. Maybe this is the week, right? Maybe this is the week that Kansas State steps up and they do it, and if that's the case, then get back on the Wildcats because they're going to be fun to watch. But, again, believe it when I see it. A couple of the games to watch, not necessarily break down too much here, but Vanderbilt versus Kentucky got a lot more interesting after a couple of big-time upsets. That's one that you might want to keep on your television. Diego Pavia, I think, is one of the more fun players in college football. We've been touting him for a while. He owns the state of Alabama. He beat Auburn last year in New Mexico State. Wouldn't beat Alabama now. That whole state belongs to him. You can just drop off the Iron Bowl trophy at Diego Pavia's dorm room steps. So you can go drop that off for him. And then Kentucky, obviously a really great defense, a lot of fun to watch. Another game maybe to watch, keep on your TV, just keep an eye on the bottom ticker, look for this one. Iowa State going to Morgantown, trying to keep their season alive, obviously undefeated, but keeping it alive, keep that Big 12 schedule rolling. Kind of wide open right now in the Big 12 for who wants to take that top spot. Iowa State's look pretty good, but tough spot on the road in Morgantown.
Yeah, we certainly heading into the season, it seemed like a Utah-Oklahoma State battle at the top of the Big 12, and I don't know that the cloak and dagger with Cam Rising, it feels like we're guarding Area 51 secrets with that, so I don't know if he's playing or what the deal is there. Oklahoma State's
see a tweet earlier, like 2 hours ago or something like that, where I don't think he's playing in this one.
Okay.
So I don't think he's going this one. It's kind of, we compared him recently to, when you got the groundhog for Groundhog's Day and he comes out and it's like, well, if Cam Rising comes out and he sees his shadow, then it's 6 more weeks of no more Cam Rising.
But then Oklahoma State's been bad this year. So Big 12 race is wide open. And I had that Iowa State game on part of the quad box for the night games last week. And, it was a little dicey in the first half with Baylor, but boy, did they come on strong in the second half of that game. So I'm liking the Cyclones. We're back up on Matt Campbell after it seemed like a couple of years of being down on him. So Morgantown's a tough place to play. I covered a game there when I was at Bowling Green. They played. This would have been 2011. So this was not. I don't think it was a Pat White. It might have been a Geno Smith, Tavon Austin team. That's a fun stadium, man. That's a tough place to play. Tough travel weekend for Iowa State going out there. West Virginia's looked a little bit better the last 2 weeks after it seemed like, we were kind of going back down on the do we need to get rid of Neil Brown discussion. Right. So will be an interesting game, but I think Iowa State has proven to this point in the season that they deserve to be trusted until proven otherwise.
Yeah, man. You mentioned Neil Brown. Trey would want me to say it if he was on the pod. Neil Brown syndrome is in full effect. We thought last year Neil Brown on the hot seat. What happened? He goes out there and he takes care of business and saves himself another year. So maybe this is where he wants to be, right? West Virginia in a little bit of a tough spot and, maybe not looking quite as good as we thought they were. Hot seat talks maybe starting to ramp back up. Neil Brown syndrome. Here we go.
Yep.
Let's get back on the horse for that one. Another week done and dusted. Week 7 preview in the books. Ryan, thanks so much for coming on. You want to go ahead and plug all your stuff real quick?
Yeah, man. Well, I appreciate you having me. I had a lot of fun on this one here. You can find us Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We are Inside the Pylon, a Midwest college football podcast. YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. Our handle is at ITPCFB. For all 3 of those, you can follow us on the gram. Is probably on Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it these days. That's the easiest place where you're going to be able to find all of our content. We're going to tweet out the show links, the YouTube links. We're planning a big old ITP road trip next weekend. We're going to West Lafayette for the Purdue-Oregon game. So we'll have some YouTube specific content for that. That one seemed like we planned that preseason mostly because it was a Friday night game. So it was like, oh, cool. We're not really going to miss any of the action for it. And then looking at the schedule, it's like, oh, well, Oregon's making a cross-country trip 6 days after they play Ohio State. That could be a potentially fun upset. And then I watched Purdue play football this year, and they suck.
They're so bad.
They are so bad. I think it's 3 mediocre offenses they've played that they've made look like world beaters in Notre Dame, Oregon State, and Wisconsin now. So I don't really have much of a hope for there being anything crazy that happens from that one. But we're going to do some YouTube specific content for that. We're going to kind of tour the campus a little bit, look for some local eateries and, just have some fun with it. We're already going. The tickets were $20, so it'll be fun.
Should be a fun weekend anyways, right? Nice little Friday night. Get on the road, get out there. It'd be fun. Guys, go seriously follow them. It's great follow. We love the content over there at Inside the Pylon. We love having you on and hope to do this again soon. Guys, go ahead, leave us a subscribe on the YouTube. If you're watching this, just go ahead, hit that button, subscribe underneath us. Go follow us on Twitter or X or whatever it is that we're calling it at 3TechPod. You can go find us over there, putting out content constantly on that one as well, and leave us some kind of a review or a follow or something like that. Leave us a comment down here saying what you think about this week, and excited to see what you guys have in store for next week. We are super excited once again. I want to remind everybody to go over to the live show after the Saturday games. We're going to be doing a live show right here on YouTube, so make sure to subscribe, keep it locked on the YouTube. And for Ryan from Inside the Pylon and for Trey and Mitch, who couldn't be here tonight, I'm Garrett Turney. We'll see you guys next time.
Gracious, how about